Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, Secrets of Wildlife Watching, Tips from the Pros, presented by Colby Brokvist and James Beissel. Colby has been guiding with Nat Hab in North America and the polar regions since 2006, and James has been guiding for us in Yellowstone since 2019. So thanks for being with us today, gentlemen. I'll hand it over to you, Colby.
Thanks, Kendall, and thank you everybody for being here today. We're excited. You know, we're in this wonderful opportunity right now while we're not traveling, sort of refocus our energies a little bit, and it's been really fun to participate in these webinars with everybody to you know, build our community a little bit and learn a little bit more. And you know, we're sort of trending away from some of the usual Nat Hab webinars where we're talking specifically about trips, and instead we're just talking about the things that we love. And in the case of Jim and I can say confidently that we love wildlife watching. And so we thought we would share our experiences with you today about how we do that, when we do that, why we do that. So here we go. We'll start off with a picture of a bear. Now, I'm in Colorado, but this picture is from Yosemite, and I'm going to start there because I used to live in Yosemite, actually, about 20 minutes outside of the park in this little town called Fish Camp. And I would go in guiding, you know, 4 or 5 days a week into the park, leading people around, seeing the waterfalls and the wildlife and things like that. And then on my days off, I would also go into the park and look for waterfalls and wildlife, and had a great time in there. And I was on the porch one night with some neighbors, and this guy, he had been born and raised in the Fish Camp area and never went into Yosemite National Park. It was literally 25 minutes to the largest waterfalls in North America and these world-class scenes. 4.1 million people a year go to Yosemite. And he never thought, I wonder what it's all about. And it really struck me that it's easy to take for granted what's in our backyards. And it might not necessarily be that we all have Yosemite in our backyard, but we do have special things. All the places that we live have special things if we, you know, turn our attention to them and get an appreciation for them. So that's kind of the first part of my intro. And then the second, just in terms of, you know, trying to create these moments, where we're going with this today is to try to create meaningful moments like you see represented in this image here. And that might be a moment to actually take a photograph, or it might just be a moment to be out in the wild and appreciate nature and you know, just be part of it. And here we have this wonderful scene. I feel like it was wonderful for me personally when I took it. But I was specifically going out looking to take pictures of black bears. This is a black bear, even though it's brown in color. And I got really fortunate the second night in the spring that I went looking for bears. I found this wonderful young female out in a meadow. And people always ask me all the time, like, oh, isn't it dangerous? You seem so close. And, you know, the bear's right there and you're on ground level. And yes, we, of course, want to be respectful for nature. But what's, I think, interesting about this picture and where we're going in this presentation is this was one of about 3 pictures that I took, and it was after about 20 or 30 minutes of spending time in the meadow with the bear. Most of the time was just there being comfortable in that place, settling into nature, making her feel comfortable, figuring out what was going on, deciding how I was going to take the photograph, and just enjoying being in the moment and recognizing what I thought was special about that moment and then being able to take that picture. And so that's what we hope to share with you today. It's not just how to run into these places in our backyards and try to find wildlife, but really how to create an experience around that to better understand the wildlife, their behaviors, our place in the natural world, and what we can do to enhance our encounters with wildlife when we're back there. And so that's my introduction. I'm going to turn to Jim now, and I think Jim has an exceptional example of what you can do in your backyard. We both live here in Colorado, and Jim, you've been paying a lot of attention to wildlife in Colorado lately, right?
Yeah, and I love how you brought up settling into the moment, because that's something that led me on my own journey of wildlife photography. I came to Colorado as a rock climber. Originally, I'm from Michigan, and I came here to climb the mountains. And one of my first encounters with wildlife here was at the base of Long's Peak. I'd gone up to photograph a friend who was climbing the casual route on the Diamond, which goes right up the middle of that huge blank east face of Long's Peak that you can see from the whole Front Range. It's called the casual route, but it's anything but casual. You typically will have to get up at about 2 o'clock in the morning and hike in the dark to get to the base because you want to get to the top of that mountain before the thunderstorms come in. And my friend Sean had decided he's going to climb the casual route and maybe I could be his photographer that day. So I brought the longest lens I had and I brought it up to Chasm Lake and I trained it on the first couple of pitches of the casual route, thinking I'd be able to use this huge long lens and just photograph him from the boulders down there. And I quickly realized that he's just this tiny little dot. Even with my longest lens, you can barely even make out like which white helmet up there is his. And I took a nap. I decided, all right, well, I'm not going to get good photos today. I might as well just take a nap. And I took a nap out there in the talus by Chasm Lake with the pikas and the marmots. And I woke up and I had a sandwich. And as I was eating my sandwich, this little brown creature just started scurrying around in the talus, and I couldn't tell what it was. And it would pop its head up, and then it would disappear, and then it would go back under the boulders and scurry around and pop up a little closer to me. And eventually it popped up about 8 feet away, and I clicked off a few photos. And I wasn't entirely sure what it was at the time. I thought it was a martin, but I'd never really seen one. I'd never really researched whether they were in Colorado or not. And it took kind of that act of just settling into a place for a while. And rock climbing can be such a go, go, go activity because you're always racing the weather, you're always racing the light, and seldom are you given the chance to talus in the middle of a route. And it just took that settling into a place and just letting the animals come to me to have that first encounter that really sparked my interest in what other species are here in our own backyards, and could I photograph more of them.
And so that sent you on a journey, didn't it? I'm gonna throw it back to you again. So now tell us about your Colorado photo project.
Yeah, for sure. I got the advice early on in my photography career that if you'd like to be a wildlife photographer, don't try to compete with these international National Geographic guys at that stage of your career. They're getting paid to travel the world and they have big budgets and lots of time to spend in these places where if I was to go, I'd be lucky to be able to spend a couple of weeks there. And there's stories to be found closer to home that you can really dig into and spend months and months and months digging into. And I decided that what I'd try to do is photograph all the mammals of Colorado. And it's kind of the climber mentality to come up with these tick lists where climbers like to get out the guidebook and go through it and find all the best routes, or maybe it's the 54 Colorado 14ers or the 7 summits, which are the highest peaks on every continent, or there's the 50 classic climbs in North America. You can go on and on. Climbers love these tick lists. So my climber brain just said, okay, I'm gonna make a tick list. I'm gonna make a list of all the mammals of Colorado, and I'll photograph all of them. And some of them had never even been seen in Colorado, or maybe hadn't been seen here for 100 years or more. So there'll definitely be some interesting discoveries to make along the way. And I'll bang that out in 3 or 4 months, no problem. Then I'll be National Geographic photographer after that, easy peasy. So here we are, I don't know, a decade later, and there's still discoveries to be made in Colorado.
Lot of discoveries, and we're looking at some images now that are from here in our backyard. And I guess once again we're fortunate, or perhaps just because of our love of wildlife, we've put ourselves in a place where we have access to wildlife. But here in Colorado, we have everything from the plains to the foothills to mid mountains and upper mountains and the western slope in Colorado. There's even desert if we want to travel 3 hours from our home. But it's pretty incredible that we have access from all that within 3 hours. And so the images, folks, that you're seeing up on the screen as they come up today, they're from both Jim and I and our exploits here in our own backyard in the state of Colorado. And I think most of these are actually pretty darn close to our actual backyards, like within 25 or 30 miles of our houses.
But less with the prairie dogs, you can almost see those from the doorstep. in Boulder,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. Right at Avery Brewery, you can drink beer and watch them go play around in there. How about these guys? This is a little bit special though, right? We don't want a full spoiler alert, but what about these guys?
Not a full spoiler, but spring in Boulder and spring on the Front Range is really just a fantastic time for baby animals. And baby fox are often denning and visible this time of year as their mothers are sunning and allowing the kits to play as they start to wean their kits and go on little hunting trips with mom. And they live right here on the edges of, our properties, on the edges of our open space. And, one of these really, really fascinating animals that we share our environment with here. So it's a real treat every spring to find a fox den potentially and watch their antics.
So I feel really fortunate in that Jim had found this fox den and brought me out, and so we have a little story near the end that we're going to show that sort of brings everything together that we're going to launch into now about wildlife watching, and then we'll use this as an example to show you how you can put it all together and create these amazing experiences for yourself, even in your backyard. And a lot of that comes down to the idea of creating your own luck. And again, Jim, I know you've done some presentations for wildlife groups in the past about creating your own luck. Do you want to introduce that idea to us?
Yeah, when I was in college, my coach used to say winners make their own luck because wildlife photography is all about luck, right? You're just at the right place at the right time. But winners can create their own luck, and the funny thing about luck is the more times you try, the more luck you have. So, I like to break that down into what are the big things you can do to create your own luck, to be there at the right place at the right time to get a beautiful photo of an animal. And there's big things you can do before you even leave your house, depending on where you're going, the time of the year, what equipment you're going to take with you, and then there's other little things you can fine tune to make your own luck to go from a good photo to a great photo once you're there with an animal and you found the species that you're looking for. I see you've got the flying squirrels up there too, and I love these guys. And this is a species that I've been able to watch right outside my mom's property. I've been helping family out recently, and we built a flying squirrel house a couple of seasons ago and had a pair of flying squirrels move in over the winter. And these guys, they're just really fun to have around. And I've seen a couple on my recent trips out into the woods at night here, and hopefully they'll stick around for a long time. Colorado has a very small population of flying squirrels. It's the northern flying squirrel that ranges down from Montana, and then it just makes like this tiny finger that goes through eastern Idaho and then just barely into Utah, where it just barely cuts into Colorado in the Roan Plateau area. That was one of the species for my Colorado mammal projects that I wasn't sure if I was ever going to be able to photograph. Only one had been documented in the state before prior. And with a few weeks worth of effort, I was able to get a few infrared video clips of them flying around in that area. It's just north of Fruita, almost to the Utah border.
You want to give us coordinates to your secret spot?
I won't give coordinates, but the data has actually been published in a journal for anybody who's interested. There's a record by a couple of Colorado Parks and Wildlife biologists that made it into I think the Northwest Journal of Science, that describes their methods and where they officially documented flying squirrels in Colorado.
Oh, that's great. So let's dissect the idea of creating your own luck a little bit. Like how do we actually do that? I think the concept is rooted in there, but what about some of the specifics? So here, the flying squirrels, we have a good example of setting up a way for animals to come to you. Bird feeders are a classic example of that. Some people have duck ponds in their backyards. In this case, we have some nesting boxes for these squirrels, and that's a wonderful way to do it. How about if we want to go out into the wilderness, into the backcountry? And in this case, what we're really talking about is we're kind of entering into the animals' world. Here we have another
That's a
picture of
great,
a prairie dog, not so far down the street from me. And we're entering into the animals world. And so I'd like to introduce that idea to everybody. And really, we're sort of used to, being the bipedal animals that we are, kind of walking around at, 5.5 feet and looking around, and we kind of talk. And humans were very used to being in command and control of our situation. What happens when we walk out into the wilderness is that's not what daily life is like for most of the animals out there, right? Things are a lot more intimate. Animals are a little more secretive. There's the ideas of predator and prey and trying to find your food and conserving resources and all these things that are just ingrained in the instincts of the animals out there. And so when we come walking in, sort of like we own the place, that has a ripple effect. There's a bit of a disturbance, if you will, in these wild spaces, and animals stop and they take notice. And so I think it's important to remember that, if we want to have these meaningful moments with animals, we want to see these wonderful behaviors, create opportunities for, intimate moments with them, or, perhaps great behavioral photography, things like that. We need to think more empathetically about what it's like to actually be an animal in those places, coming into their world, and making them calm, instilling confidence that, we're not doing any harm, we're not intending to do any harm, that we're just sharing that space with them. I think that's really important.
It really is.
I think those are the two big concepts. Yeah, you think so, Jim?
Well, to reinforce what you said about, entering the animals world, one of the exercises I did early on when I was learning wildlife photography, I went out and worked with Lee Klein, who's a very accomplished Colorado wildlife photographer. And one of the things he had us do was just to go out into a field with the Wyoming ground squirrels that are all around Estes Park, and sit there and watch them and move among them until they would accept your motions. And it really came down to just finding the rhythm of the place and not moving like a predator, not moving like a human that's, in a hurry to get somewhere, but just falling into the rhythm of that place. And an animal that previously would have disappeared into a hole when it spotted you from 300 yards away would eventually recognize that you had settled into that rhythm, you weren't hunting it, and start to move about more freely. And you see it feeding, or it's grooming itself, or interacting with other animals, and a lot of other things you don't see until you just really settle into the rhythm of an area. So I love what you said there.
Yeah, I think it's particularly important, especially when we're thinking about animals that are traditionally viewed as prey, or view themselves as prey. They know full well that they're prey, right?
Absolutely.
And so, animals, like a lot of the smaller animals, are, ungulates, even things like bison, to really make them comfortable is the key to a great experience. And so what does that really look like? Slower movements, again, this idea of, not trying to run around looking for animals, but sitting in one place and looking around. I actually really got into birding a while ago, which I am now proud to say. It used to be something that I would have to talk about, in certain circles very quietly. But I'm happy to say that I love birds and I love birding. And the reason for that was because of a guide that I had in South Africa, actually. We were out, and it was myself and a friend, and then there was another couple, and the guy that was on the trip was, the person. Sometimes I'm that person, a big giant 600 millimeter lens, and he was specifically looking for the big five in this case. And you're like, where's the big five? And so our guide was an ornithologist, knew a lot about botany and anthropology, and he was really engaging and talking all about the sort of essentially jungles in the northern part of Kruger National Park. And we would stop and look at velvet ants, and we would listen for birds, and we would look at weaver nests, and then we'd see some bigger animals, and we'd move on. And at one point, this guy got so frustrated, and he said, I don't care about your birds. I don't want to listen to things. I'm here to take pictures of a lion, and you need to get me on the lion. And the guy just casually kind of turned around, and looked back with a smile on his face. He's like, I am working to get you lions, but we can't just run around and look for the lions. We have to spend some time and pay attention in these places. And in the meantime, we might as well look for other things and settle into the vibe of the place, because the other animals are telling us a lot about what's going on around here. And by listening to the birds or alarm calls or smaller mammals, how things are moving through the forest, we can make judgments on where we might find our predators and some of the other big animals that are around. And I thought that was really cool. And not only did I learn a lot about birds on that trip, but I learned a lot about just settling in, you know, just not, again, maybe getting away from the idea of a tick list and saying, like, I'm just going to take whatever comes right now. I'm just going to settle into this moment. And I think that's really important. So how do we do it? What does that look like? What do you actually do when you're on the ground in the forest?
Well, it really starts before you get on the ground. You know, if luck is being at the right place at the right time and having a camera there to take the picture, that really starts before you even leave the house. You know, knowing what species are going to be present where you're going. So understanding their range, understanding the seasonal components of what types of habitat they're going to use at different times of year, and even understanding their daily routines. Are they a nocturnal species? Are they active during the midday? Are they active at dawn and dusk? All of those things before you even leave the house can help you set yourself up for success. And then of course you've got to have a camera there. So, you know, some of my biggest heartbreaks have come when my camera was either at home or buried in the bag. So, you know, now every time I get to Rocky Mountain National Park, when I go past the big sign at the entrance, the camera comes out of the bag and it's there to grab, because you just never know what's going to go running across the road. But once you're out in the field and you have gotten yourself into that place, that's when you can really start to look at things at a finer scale. And you know, that might mean knowing where your species is going to be present at a more micro scale. You know, you're in the right range because let's say you've gone to Rocky Mountain National Park and you know there's elk there, but depending on the time of the year, they might be closer to the entrance, or, you know, Beaver Meadows or Horseshoe Park, or they might be up on Trail Ridge Road. So knowing how they're going to use their habitat, where they're going to find food, that's going to help you, you know, hike in the right direction once you get to your location. And then again, you know, a lot of elk activity, especially during the fall rut, takes place at dawn and dusk. So if you can be there at dusk and you're at the right place at the right time, you might get that, you know, amazing fall rut bugling show with the elk sizing each other up and in the meadows at dawn or dusk. It's just, you know, one of those beautiful sights. But it just starts with, you know, being at the right place at the right time.
Yeah. You kind
and
of
then,
teach
yeah,
about
it's settling into the place, like you said, and sometimes you just gotta wait for the magic. What's that?
Oh, sorry. I think there's a little disconnect in the delay for a second. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was going to say, you know, you're sort of touching on another idea with sort of, you know, being in the right place in the right time that I think is maybe worth calling out a little more directly too, and that's understanding the habitat. Like, you know, in a case like what you're talking about, looking for elk, you know, to know what habitat the elk prefers, or, you know, a little bird. In the case of the picture we're looking at, here we have a little house wren, you know, and so knowing the habitat of the house wren, you know, he's like, oh, really likes, you know, scrubby stuff that's, you know, kind of near some water. Here in Colorado, often if there's, you know, cottonwood trees and willow trees, like you're gonna find the house wrens. And same thing with the elk when we're looking at those big charismatic things, knowing their habitat. Elk, of course, is an easy one. They're grazers. They're going to be in the meadow. Like, I'm not going to hike up, you know, the big trails into the alpine areas of, you know, Chasm Lake trying to find elk. They're just not going to be there. And I think that's important too. Knowing that these animals are around is one thing, but knowing specifically where to look for a specific animal, if that's your goal, is important. Or the alternative, of course, is, you know that animals are really active during the crepuscular hours, is a fun biology word, right? So dawn and dusk, going to a new place, and then just sitting and listening and looking to see what, you know, what shows up in that area and learning about what makes that habitat special. So habitat's a really important concept, I think.
Huge. And then settling into the place. I wanted to share this story with you. We've been photographing foxes fox dens a lot this spring, and there's 4 species of fox here in Colorado. We have the red fox and the gray fox, which are found in the montane regions of the Front Range. Also the swift fox, which is a plains-dwelling fox on the eastern parts of the state, and the kit fox, which is a desert-dwelling fox found on the western margins of the state. So I've been able to watch red fox and swift fox this year. And the swift fox den was just one of these beautiful moments where we're actually watching a badger den, and we'd been watching the badger den for a few hours and had kind of settled in, and we're having, you know, kind of a snack or something and joking about how wonderful it would be if we could spot a swift fox den from this same vantage point on the prairie. And after a little bit of work with binoculars and the scope, lo and behold, there is a swift fox den about 3/4 of a mile away from where we were standing. And from one spot on the prairie, we were able to see the badger den and the swift fox den at the same time and watch the kits of the badgers and the fox at the same time. It's just magical. And what it really comes down to is you just gotta let that magic happen. Wherever it is that you are, if you can settle into that place and settle into that moment and let that kind of magic happen, you get lucky more than you think with that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. So let's explore the idea of settling in a little bit, because we've mentioned that a few different times. You know, what does that mean to me? I think, you know, sitting down in one place. You know, I may even have a stool sometimes if I know I'm going to be there for a while, or if I'm photographing. But you know, kind of getting down low, that makes the animals feel good. It also means that you're not up moving around doing weird things. They know where to expect you. And also sitting down, it's you know, it's a very submissive behavior, isn't it? You're not poised. Even if you're holding a camera, something that's pointed at the animal, or binoculars pointed at the animal all of the time, then you know, you still have to take this submissive behavior. And animals, they instinctively recognize that. I think if I'm with animals that are particularly sensitive, you know, I might even lay down sometimes, or you know, just kind of put some brush or an object or something in between me and them, so they know, like, I'm not able to act aggressively toward them at any moment. I think that's an important thing. And then being quiet when you're there, just being respectful of that space, not being distracting. Really, that's the biggest picture, the biggest take home, right? You want to make yourself not distracting when you're out there, so these animals feel comfortable. Do you have other ideas for that? What does that look like for you?
Well, you mentioned sitting down and laying down, and I think those can be really good tools. And I think the key is to avoid acting like a predator. Animals know when something's watching them. You can do this with a squirrel in your yard. If you have a squirrel or a rabbit in your yard and you're just going about your business, they'll go about theirs. But at the moment you start staring at them, watch what happens. They'll run. You know, 9 out of 10 times, even an animal that's been around humans a lot, once you start staring it down, it's gone. And it's the same thing with any animal that you're working with. You want to just fall into the rhythm of the place and not act like a predator. And you know, that might mean sitting down, laying down, moving in a way that isn't like stalking. And this is a fun thing to do if you've got a house cat, is just get down low and tense your muscles and maybe clench your toes or your feet and just stare at your house cat and see what that house cat will do. Mine will pounce me every time. Every time he'll jump right on my face if I do that to him. So that's what you want to avoid, are those kind of behaviors and those kind of tense and busy behaviors that might alert something that you might be a predator, and just let it think of you as part of the environment. Fall into the rhythm of the place and the tempo of the place. Think of how a deer moves through the forest. It's deliberate, but it's at a different pace. It's slower. It's more aware of its surroundings. And another thing I try to avoid doing is just making a beeline towards whatever it is I want to photograph. You know, if you're approaching it in a straight line, going straight at it, that's going to put the animal on edge. If you can kind of wander in a little closer and watch the animal and see how it's reacting to you, and oh, you know, when I stepped that way, it put its ears up and it's looking right at me and it's twitching its tail now, I think maybe I'd better back off a little bit, or just sit here for a little while and see what it does. Maybe it'll go back to eating or go back to whatever it was doing before. and just watch for those cues from your animal.
And to be mindful of that, like when is a difference in behavior initiated? You know, like you do one thing and when does it change? You know, we think about, oh, I always want to get a little closer, or how much can I move around? I mean, different animals are going to have different tolerances for that. So understanding that, you know, you can probably get a lot closer to a fox if you lay down on your belly and, you know, just let it come over to you because you're curious, than you're ever going to be able to come to something like a deer or an elk, right? I've shot foxes with wide angle lenses. I think all my deer pictures are with like a 300 or 400 millimeter. Yeah. You know, I feel compelled to share with you, Jim, and everybody, because we started with that bear picture at the beginning. And, you know, remember it was kind of down low in the grass through some trees, and then she was eating grass. And I actually realized what a good example it is for what you're talking about. So in order to get that picture, like 20 minutes or more, I just kind of wandered in. I wandered through the forest. I kind of came into the meadow. I was on the edge of the meadow. I never really looked at the bear, you know, like kind of acknowledged there. I wanted the bear to know that I was there, but not paying any attention. But here's the extreme example that I think will be funny to share is that I actually got down. I put my camera bag down next to it, and I just sat again in that kind of submissive, just sort of sitting position like a child, and I pretended to eat grass.
Yeah,
that's what she was doing out in the meadow. Right? And it's like, no, here we are. We're cool, you know. Like we enjoy the same things. Like we're cool. We have this in common. And you know, especially for a highly intelligent animal like a bear, you know, like something like that. But you know, it's probably an extreme example to actually replicate their behaviors. But you know, that's how, you know, encounters like that are you know, how they come together, how you're able to take pictures of, you know, those kind of intimate moments is really putting yourself in the shoes of the animal.
I've noticed that deer often are much more relaxed. If you just mimic the actions of a grazing deer, you can actually walk, you know, amongst them often. And if they look at you and you start chomping or acting like you're eating grass, they just, okay, that's another grazer. They're not going to eat me.
Yeah.
And they go back to their business. So yeah, it all goes back just to settling into the rhythm of the place and not acting like a predator.
What about things we don't want to be doing? I bet most Nat Hab guests have a good feeling for this, but like, what's your tick list of things you don't like to do out there when you're with animals?
Well, it really comes down to knowing the animal and knowing how what you're doing is affecting it. And almost everything we do as humans affect wildlife on some level. So, you know, having a better understanding of what that means and how that impacts the animal, and am I doing something to this animal that's going to cause it to waste precious calories that could then be a life or death problem for this animal all of a sudden, because they're just trying to survive out there a lot of the time. And if it has to run and it burns the calories that it might have needed to evade a predator later that day, then I may have really done something to harm that animal. So, you know, knowing your animal and knowing how it's responding to is really step one. And then, you know, everything that you do thereafter needs to kind of be with that as your kind of guiding light. So, you know, some of the things that I see most frequently are people rushing in too close. They're getting too close with, you know, even an iPhone because they didn't come out into the field with the right camera. And you know, I think it's great to watch wildlife and observe it. Even if you don't have a fancy camera, you can still have these amazing opportunities to observe wildlife, but we have to be realistic about what you can and can't do based on equipment. And, you know, personally, like if I'm in the field and I don't have the long lens with me, I'm not going to go rushing in. I think it's not respectful to the animal because I didn't remember to, you know, pack right that day, for example.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's important to recognize that what are the chances that the moment that you first see an animal, or even like first walk up to the Taj Mahal, whatever it is, what are the chances that that is the perfect moment and you have to rush in right there to take a picture? You know, it's probably not. It's really exciting, and there's something in our own little lizard brains that says, there it is, like this is what I've been waiting for. I need to happen. And sure, wildlife can be transient, it can move, we do need to be careful of not losing our moments, but I think if we do just stop for a couple of minutes and breathe and pay attention to what's going around, again, not only will the animals settle in and stay longer, but our imagery is often much better once we give it a little bit of thought too.
It absolutely, and the photo that I often see people getting is the animal running away. So you're really choosing between, the photo of the animal's butt, or maybe just hanging out a little longer and having the opportunity to just enjoy a moment. I think
Distant pictures from the other guy chasing it away and it just ran by you.
yeah, sometimes you get that.
I was thinking about some other things too, about just the idea of not baiting and feeding animals out there. I know some photographers will do that, particularly with, animals like bears or, predators. They'll drag carcasses out, and, ethically that's not great. It's actually illegal in some states, or, publicly owned land. So we definitely want to consider that, but it's not a great way to do it. And, if you're going for images, trying to, use baiting tactics, again, it's not usually the best image because it's not really a natural behavior. That's a really good one. And just, again, back to the idea of just trying to not disturb the animals when we're out there. Animals are, they're trying to focus on feeding themselves and reproduction and not getting eaten and all of these things. And if we're distracting them from the things that occur within their own energy balance, that can be detrimental. I particularly think of winter circumstances. I know in Yellowstone on our winter trips, we're really sensitive to moving around some animals, and we keep a lot of extra distance even from things like bison in the winter time, because the struggle is real sometimes for them, and it's good to think about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see, shall we? We're a little ways into this thing, Jim. How about if we switch over a couple ideas about just preparation and gear real quick, just to bring it to people's attention, and then folks will switch over to a fun little case study with the foxes before we finish off today.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. Well, let's see. I'll start us off for our list. We have a couple of things to talk about. If you're going to be out there with animals and you're going to be settling in and you're going to try to be, one with the world and all zen out there when you're with the animals, and you're probably going to be spending a little bit of time out there too. So it does make some sense to consider, your dress, how the weather is going to change. Of course, if you're going out, just after dinner, it could get dark on you or quite a bit colder. I know here in Colorado, we're always thinking about winds kicking up in the afternoon because we have such a difference in elevation. Here on the Front Range. And so thinking about dress is really important. I'll make a special note about camouflage. I think, a lot of folks are like, I'm going to go wildlife watching, I'm going to wear camouflage. And that's fine. You can do that. Sometimes it makes sense. If you're going to be trying to get, duck photos, it might make some sense to, have a little blind or be in camouflage. But generally, I think that it's not a bad thing that the animals know you're there, right? It's more of a weird vibe if you're trying to sneak around and pretend you're not there, and like they can smell you, they catch your little movements, and if you're trying to hide and you're sitting behind a big long camera lens, or it's weird, I think that's weird for them. I don't really overthink it. And case in point would be, all the new Nat Hab guide stuff is bright blue and bright red. And we go all over the world with that stuff, and it works. So I wouldn't overthink camouflage, but I would give some thought to what you're actually wearing, what the weather is going to be like. A couple other things on my list here are binoculars. Folks always ask about, what kind of binoculars should I get? Those little tiny things are great because they can fit in your purse or a backpack easily, but they don't allow in a lot of light, right? So when we're thinking about binoculars, we're thinking about the size of the ocular, right? Particularly the exit ocular. And then we're thinking about magnification. So, how big is it making it, how much light comes in. And those little binoculars, while they might have a similar magnification, and you think, oh, well, everything's 8 times, magnification, so why don't I get the smaller ones? It's easier to travel with. But what happens is that you don't have as much light coming into those. So you lose clarity, and B, you lose some ability at dawn and dusk, like when the light's low, or if you're in forested areas, to be able to see things clearly. So I really appreciate an exit ocular that's somewhere around 42, and magnification that's somewhere around 8 or 10 by. 8 by seems to be a little bit easier for people because it gives you a wider field of view, so you can find things a little easier. If you're more adept at using binoculars, or if you're a birder and you want to be a little, have closer views, then a 10 by 42 is really nice. And I think personally that's the sweet spot for most of us as travelers and wildlife enthusiasts, that it ends up being a really nice size. So 8 by 42 or 10 by 42 is a great way to go. And then I'll briefly mention scopes. I think scopes, they're more useful for birders or for people that really need to look at things at a long distance, or maybe photographers. Digiscoping, that's a word that's new to you, is all about taking pictures through a scope. So it's a nice way to be able to watch animals. And then if there is a moment where you want to get a picture, you don't also need all this extra camera equipment. You can simply just mount your iPhone or your smartphone right onto this scope and take a picture, and that's really nice. We use those scopes in a lot of the Nat Hab trips. You've probably seen those before out in the field. I think for most of us in our daily lives, unless we're birders or serious digiscope photographers, binoculars are probably more useful than scopes, but worth mentioning anyway. Jim, you had a couple more things, about preparation?
Yeah, well, equipment wise, I like to keep it simple. Once I know what it is that I want to photograph, it's taken a little trial and error to get here, but I usually have a pretty good idea of what camera lens combo I want to use. And that's pretty much what I'll stick to for a session, because I really don't want to be fooling around, changing lenses or fiddling with equipment any more than I have to be. I really would just rather be there, have the equipment be out of my way, and wait for those moments to happen that you might miss if you were changing lenses or fooling around with anything else. So for me, it comes down to the more you know, the less you need, and it takes a little bit of practice and some trial and error to get there. But if you know this lens and this camera is what's going to work for you that day, I'll keep it pretty minimal. Maybe I'll throw in one extra lens in case I need to swap something out, but even then, that's less likely. Plan on being there a while. I think it helps to bring something either to sit on or to kneel on. The little foam gardening pads that you can get at the hardware store that have the handle on one end, it's just a piece of foam. Those can be really nice to kneel on or sit on, like a camping hunting seat kind of thing works too, or just a little simple folding stool. But I try to never bring much more than I can carry. That way, if I need to, I can move my whole operation. So it's typically a camera and maybe a foam seat or something like that. Yeah, and then, don't forget to take care of yourself when you're out there. Oftentimes, I find myself sitting for 2 or 4 hours at a time. And if you're in the sun or if it's cold, or if you just get hungry, it can be really helpful just to slip an energy bar or a Snickers bar into your pocket. Or if you're not a camel, or if it's really hot out, bring a little bit of water and just do whatever you need to do to make yourself comfortable for a period of time so that you can just be there and let things unfold.
That's a great segue. So being there, letting things unfold. Here's a picture. We were together. This is a picture of you just a couple of weeks ago, and we went out to see the foxes that you were talking about. And so let's finish up there. I'll wrap up with a little case study of how it all came together. And to start this off is you're very well connected to a lot of the wildlife organizations in Colorado, right? And that's a great thing for people to do, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the more, like we said earlier, the more times you try, the more luck you have. And I think that kind of also, it works the same way with the more places you get out, the more people you interact with, the more different parks and environments you're exposed to, the more luck you seem to have too. So yeah, that's That's a great way to find wildlife, is simply networking with other people and going out on nature walks, even if it's like a local Audubon bird hike or something like that.
Yeah, Audubon, North American Photography Association. Those are some great ones. All sort of uh, focused on wildlife watching. So that's a great way to get the heads up if you're not really sure, or if you want somebody to go out there with and participate with. I know I'm always looking for people that share a love of wildlife to go out. Not everybody's available every day, and so participating in these clubs can tune you into things like our little fox den here. So spoiler alert, neither Jim nor I found this fox den. This one came through Jim, which came through some of your friends in these local wildlife clubs. And then, so tell us about coming here and discovering this place and what's happening here before we reveal our final images to everybody.
Well, I think the fun thing when you have a site that's local is that you can go back, day after day, week after week in some cases, and you can kind of watch these little natural history stories unfold, and you can get to know some of these animals on a more personal basis and watch them as they grow, as they explore, as the dramas of nature, whatever they are, unfold. And that's a real joy with fox dens in particular, because they grow up very fast and they all have their own personalities. And in this case, a lot of them are different colors, which makes it even fun too. These are red fox, which is, it's the same species. They're all the same species, but they come in different coat patterns. So the one on top there is called the silver fox, and he's just simply a black red fox. And we do get to see these fairly frequently in Colorado compared to the rest of the country. I've heard a lot of different stories behind this, but take this with a grain of salt. But back during the Depression, there was a fur farm of some kind on the Front Range in Colorado, and they bred fox for different coat patterns for the fur industry, and some of those escaped, and that gene is now more prevalent in the wild. I don't know if it's true or not, but I certainly have seen more silver foxes on the Front Range of Colorado than I have most anywhere else. And they're just a beautiful animal.
Stunning animal. So here we have a great example of how everything's come together, right? We're participating in local wildlife organizations. We're part of the community out here. There's been a little bit of discovery to find this place, to understand how it works, going back multiple days, figuring out what time of day the foxes are most active, where they typically hang out, what their movement patterns are like once they do come out of the dens, how the mother's coming back and forth and feeding, and what routes she uses for that. And then you learn so much about them, then it's like, all right, now what are those moments I want to capture? And of course, it's these wonderful family moments, because when mom's going to be back, what time of day she's going to be there, where to expect them to be, and you have the proper position and photography equipment, vantage point to witness this whole thing. And so a wonderful story of, I think, everything coming together here that we're talking about today. And this, like Jim and I live 15 minutes from this fox den. So just right in our own backyards, and you guys can find the same thing about, wherever you're at. I think the idea is it's just to keep your wits about you and have fun and be prepared and settle in. What do you have final thoughts for everybody here today, Jim?
Yeah, exactly what you said. Wherever you are, there's always a story, there's always a discovery to be made. It might be squirrels, it might be a rusty patched bumblebee, or it might be a minnow in the pond or stream that's near your house. It may not be foxes, but if you settle into a place and explore, there's always something to discover.
I think so. We should probably throw it over to Kendall for some questions. Kendall, as you're teeing that up, I'll just mention that the funny part about this is, unexpectedly, when Jim and I were planning this, we were talking on the phone, and he was at a Cracker Barrel because it just happened to be a good place to pull over. And what landed were 3 sandhill cranes right in front of him. So I think the idea of keeping your wits about you and paying attention, you just never know where some of this stuff is going to pop up. And now Now we know where
You never
Santa Fe
know.
hang out.
Yeah, yeah, some days we're driving all over Yellowstone looking for those guys, and then sometimes you see them at the Cracker Barrel. So you just never know. Always have your wits about you.
Kendall, what do you have for us today?
Hi. I do have some questions for you. First, I'd like to remind everyone that if you have questions for Colby or James, that you can submit them in your control panel in the questions field. Okay, first question. How do you change how you settle in based on the environment you're in? For example, do you act differently in a heavily wooded forest than a high alpine environment or a wide open prairie?
I think more so than the habitat is what animal you're most interested in. In general, I think just settling in and not acting like a predator, and just trying to make it look like you're just there doing your own thing is really the biggest key to any of it. I don't necessarily associate it with habitat. What do you think about that, Jim?
Well, I think from a habitat standpoint, it might come down to knowing where the animals are going to be active, and in every habitat there's natural corridors where animals travel, and then there's kind of deserts where they don't really spend any time. And I think talking about the alpine, one example of that might be like the edge of a talus field. That can be a really rich spot for species because there's forbs and grasses that are growing right at the foot of these talus fields. So the pikas, for example, are living in the talus, and they're stashing their hay piles in the talus, but they're making these excursions out into the grass to get their food. And that's kind of the area that the predators like to patrol too. So if you were to sit at the edge of a talus field, for example, I think you'd have a lot more luck than if you were to hike several hundred yards up from where those food sources are and settle in. You may not see any wildlife. As far as like the act of settling in goes, I think every environment kind of dictates its own approach. Um, Hiking through the woods is a very noisy affair, and you're not likely to sneak up on anything doing that when you're breaking branches and crawling over tree trunks and breaking things. So, you may have better luck just sitting down in that kind of environment, where if you're somewhere that you can move a little more quietly and you can see a long distance, maybe walking is a little more effective for initially spotting what you're looking for.
Okay, great. I have a two-parter for you guys. Can you first define how to not act like a predator more precisely? And also, if you're watching a predator, do you have tips on your body language?
Well, I'll start with the first part, and then maybe Colby, you can address the second part on predator observation. But I hinted at this earlier, but I think a great exercise, if you have access to a house cat, is to get low, get tense, stare it directly in the eyes, clench your toes, clench your feet, maybe like give your butt a little bit of a wiggle, and watch what your cat will do to respond. It'll very likely pounce you back. And it's a similar thing you can see unfold in natural history footage, watching wildlife videos, or just thinking about how a predator would act. Very, very low to the ground, very deliberate, very straight line in their approach to their prey, locked on with laser beam eye focus with just a singular goal in mind, which is that animal. And if that doesn't work, I think you could even do this on fellow humans. Just think about walking down the street. If somebody's staring straight at you or walking straight at you, and they're in kind of a confrontational body language, how uneasy that can make you feel. So it's the same thing for these prey animals. They're very intuitive to when something's watching them and how they're being watched, and if that animal's following them.
Yeah, I think the idea of showing deference to the animals is really important, predator or prey, and maybe that's a good segue. Like looking down, looking away, not making direct eye contact is a great thing to do. We're used to walking around on two legs, kind of owning the place, and if you're taking an athletic stance, or the leadership seminars will tell you to like body posture for power, if you're standing there like a superhero, like that's more intimidating. If you're poised on the ground like a sprinter, or linebacker. You know, those are athletic stances that animals will intuit as, you know, you're ready for action, you're ready for movement, and they don't know how to interpret that. As opposed to, you know, just sitting down, laying on your side, laying against the tree with your knees up, that sort of thing. Like, animals can see that you can't move very quickly, and that you're in more of a submissive posture. Remember, animals that are being attacked, they're not going to show their undersides. They often don't expose like big parts of their neck. If you can do that, you're showing these animals your belly, and you're laying, you know, kind of sitting against a tree or on a chair with your stomach up. That is it's very submissive, right? And then as far as predators are concerned, you know, most predators are very, very intelligent, and so they can not just intuit, but sometimes really even think through, you know, a situation and what's going on. Predators, I'm really cautious of things like binoculars and cameras pointing at them. You know, like Jim's example of just someone on the street looking at you. You know, imagine if you had someone on the street pointing a gun at you, and everywhere you move, that person just turned and pointed a gun at you. And of course, animals don't recognize guns or long photo lenses or things, but they do recognize that something is being pointed at them, and there is attention fully on them, and everywhere that they move, that goes. You think of animals like wolves and grizzly bears and mountain lions. These are animals that are, yes, predators, but they've also been preyed upon by people, and there's this, you know, this culture of being afraid of people. And so when I'm trying to photograph those animals, or even just witness those animals in their natural environment, I'm trying to do it more from a distance. I'm trying to do it from submissive positions. And I usually kind of let them move into my space rather than trying to move into their space, because they're just so conscious of being pushed around by people all of the time. So setting up where, you know pathways that predators use, like pinch points in topography, things like that, entrances to meadows, whatever it might be, and just waiting there more patiently, I think is good behavior when you're trying to encounter predators.
Great. We've got time for a couple more questions for you guys. First question, do you ever feel the need to bring any items for defense? And if so, what are some examples?
I bring jam.
Honestly, in some situations, I will carry bear spray. That's really the limit of anything I've ever felt compelled to carry. I mean, there's very few situations I ever feel like I'm in danger from the animal. There are a few situations where a gun is on board, but for the most part, it comes down to understanding your species and how you're affecting it and how you're presenting yourself. I have honestly had far more issues with humans and with dogs than I've ever had with wildlife. That's the honest truth. I've had far scarier encounters with humans, so I think animals are often the least of my worries.
Yeah, I agree. I've had guns pulled on me. When it comes to safety with animals, Jim's point of, I think the bigger point is just having a respect for those animals, showing deference. That will often alleviate any situations, and that translates then, if you can carry that on to, it's if you're surprising them oftentimes. And so that's where things, like clapping or bear bells in grizzly bear country come into play, and that sort of thing. Like, the animal is aware that you're there, and then you're showing respect and deference and not pursuing them, all the other things that we talked about. Then you've really done a lot to mitigate any perceived risk.
Okay, and I think you may have briefly mentioned this earlier, but can you let everyone know what your favorite camera lenses are to bring? And of course, this might vary depending on what you want to photograph.
I'll go first. Probably my all-time favorite lens is a Nikon 300 f4. It's a very compact lens. It stays out of your way. You can carry it over your shoulder, around your neck, and it's a go-to for just about every situation. How about you, Colby?
Yeah, I mean, we all, of course, have our own different creative eye or ability to carry a lot or little equipment, and depending on what animal we're looking for. I have to say, I really like putting animals in their habitat. Well, the close-up images like this, like the image that we're looking at with the fox, certainly we want something close-up and emotional in there, and telephotos really work. But I think as wildlife photographers, we need to remember to, put the animal in its place, help tell the animal's story. I have done a lot of wildlife photography with my 24 to 70 f2.8 lens. And more recently, I've gotten into remote photography a little bit. I'm not one to set camera traps and that sort of thing, but I'll go out with my camera equipment and set it up on a tripod. And I've been using a 20mm lens lately with a remote switch to get close-up pictures, and it makes for a really nice, like sort of creative angle, almost like you see in adventure photography, like climbing photography or something. And I really like that. I think a lot of it really just comes down to your creative eye, but Jim's point earlier of trying to minimize your kit, it's just so important. You want to be nimble out there, you want to have fun, and honestly, I find that learning how to be creative with one or two lenses allows us to be more creative, right? If we have 5 different lenses, we tend to associate those lenses with a different shot, and we don't use them for anything else. And so having a small kit really allows for creativity. Maybe you can't get the shot that you would naturally go to with that lens, but you can do something different and you end up with something really, really unique.
Well said.
Okay, great. That was the last question we have time for today. That was really wonderful, guys. I want to hand it back over to you guys for some closing comments. So let's start with James.
Oh, well, yeah, thank you so much. And, I hope this was helpful. I think, make your own luck. And the more you try, the more you'll have, and go explore whatever you have in your backyard or in your neighborhood, and see what you can discover.
And Colby?
Yeah, we all can't travel right now, and I think it's the best time ever to think about what's in our backyard and get re-inspired and re-energized about the places that we live in. And we can make a lot of discoveries in our own backyards, and I hope this has inspired you all to go take a walk and see what you can find.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature with Nat Hab's Dr. Court Whalen and World Wildlife Fund's Vice President for Travel, Tourism, and Conservation, Jim Sano. We did record today's presentation, and we'll get that replay out to you soon. So with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Thanks, Colby and James. Bye, everybody.